Hey everybody, I'm back and I feel like the dust is settled enough on the Xbox stuff that I can actually kind of coherently formulate my thoughts on them instead of kind of in the midst of it where every time I thought I could kind of, crystallize what I had to say about it, some other news would drop and it would completely throw everything I was thinking on it out the window. So just to kind of recap what's going on, they're completely restructuring Xbox. Um, 5 studios that are being spun off either as indies or being sold outright. You've got 3,200 layoffs, 1,600 up front, 16 on the back, and just a complete revamping of their strategy and how they're handling their IP. And we still don't have all the details as to what, if anything, is changing with Helix, but we know they're really scrutinizing how they're going about Helix. Um, I could put on the hat of the artist and kind of sit there and rail on the consolidation and the layoffs and the potential, I mean, yeah, these studios are being spun off as indies or being sold, but that still doesn't, they still aren't technically out of the woods yet. And, I could hand wring over all that. But I think in the era that we're in, even if you're fairly capitalistic, the levels of consolidation going on in gaming, in the entertainment industry, is concerning. Consolidation, because I mean, if you're really truly a capitalist, then this level of consolidation is concerning because more competition is better for capitalism, because when companies are competitive, that forces them to kind of step up their game because they want to win your business. If less and less competition is in the marketplace, then companies don't step up, they generally step on. And the people that they step on is us, the consumer. So, the level of consolidation going on is highly concerning. Now, that's also why, even though these changes, for the most part, may leave a bad taste in most of our mouths, I'm hoping they're at least successful. Because in a world where we are reduced down to just Nintendo and Sony as the only players in the console space, that's not a good environment, because PlayStation has and Nintendo have shown on multiple occasions how really not great for consumers they can be, whether you look at it from some of the stuff Nintendo has done around egregiously, like, iffy steps to protect their IP, even going so far as to, squash ROM sites and emulation sites for games they haven't even touched in 40 years. Um, to obviously now, with the most recent news, is Sony going away from physical media or even having any kind of physical drive in the PlayStation 6. Uh, so, leaving just those two in place without at least a third real competitor in the console space isn't a great idea. So I'm hoping what Xbox is doing is successful. Now, I do think Asha Sharma is really taking the right steps to get there, because I'm just going to put my kind of corporate hat on here. They were losing 64 cents on a dollar, and that's an insane amount to lose. They had to do something. Phil Spencer bought up way too many studios that were not really going to give them the kind of return on their investment or the hype. I mean, We Happy Few was a very, kind of middling cult hit. So buying, their studio and then having them put out something that, again, yes, maybe artistically sound and, maybe great as an art piece, but it's not going to light the world on fire. And when you're paying hundreds of millions and, in some cases, with Activision Blizzard, billions of dollars on acquisitions, you need to make sure that these companies are putting out stuff that's going to light the world on fire so that you make your money back, and, you know, that was the Disney strategy with Star Wars. That's why they didn't go with George's treatments, because they thought it'd piss off people the way the prequels did. But what did they do? They put out, The Force Awakens, which was like, let's just give everybody the member berries that'll tick all these boxes for what the fans want, and we'll make a ton of money. And it did. But in a way, it kind of set them up for failure in the future. But that's because they didn't learn the right lessons. The problem with Xbox is they went so completely hands-off with Phil Spencer that they were releasing stuff that, one, wasn't going to set the world on fire, and two, in the case of Redfall, was a broken, buggy mess that the studio itself was begging them to shut down, that they were hoping was going to get shut down, and Phil just kind of threw his hands up and just went, nope, you guys do you, keep it going, and never stepped in, never put any kind of hand down. And that's the cardinal sin of what Phil Spencer did. Was, there's one mistake I've learned over the years that leaders tend to make, and that's the everybody's buddy fallacy. And what that is that you can be the cool parent as a team lead or a supervisor or a manager. And the problem with that is it's ultimately going to set you up to fail. Because you're going to eventually, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, but eventually, on a long enough timeline, you're going to end up in a position where you are going to have to make a difficult choice. And you're basically going to be forced into two spots. Either not making the difficult choice and having the difficult choice made for you, or being the one that makes the difficult choice. And either scenario is going to land you as being a hypocrite, or in just burning all the goodwill you may have built up under the guise of you're everybody's buddy and you're the cool parent. And that's exactly where Phil landed himself. He went hands off. You do you, make whatever crazy art project you want as a video game. And then ultimately what ended up happening is they were spending so much money on acquisitions that Satya and Microsoft corporate's eyes got on them. And then Phil was forced to start having to do things that went against the whole everybody's buddy thing. Layoffs, studio closures, all these kind of things. So all the goodwill that he had built up being everybody's buddy just got wiped out. And it was his own doing. Because you can't do that and be a good leader. You just can't. It's like people tell parents, you are not your children's best friend. You're their parent. Doesn't mean you can't go out and have a good time and, hang out and do all that kind of stuff, but you are never going to be their best friend. You're not their friend. It is a different categorical relationship. And it's the same thing with supervisors and leaders. You are not their best friend. You are their leader. You need to step in and you need to right the ship and you need to, correct for mistakes. And sometimes you got to let people go. And that's where Phil found himself, with just being so hands-off and so being everybody's buddy, that ultimately he was forced in a position to burn all of that everybody's buddy goodwill. And now we have someone who is coming in and leading the ship. And you can say, well, maybe she's going too far the other direction. I don't think so. I think it just feels that way because Phil was so far in that direction. He was so far over here that what Asha's doing seems like, oh my God, this is, corporate headhunting. Yeah, it just, blah. It seems now like almost she's on the other extreme where she's actually probably more where Phil should have been. Phil probably should have been a little closer to where Asha is. Because what is Asha doing? She's, cutting studios that really they probably shouldn't have bought. As much as, I'm not, Double Fine makes great games. Compulsion, from what I played of South of Midnight, a fairly decent action, game. But again, these are games that weren't going to set the world on fire. Redfall, and then, of course, that's putting, Arcane into the crosshairs. I mean, the way they've been floundering with Blade, and he never could, like, how do you not step in and make sure that Blade is on track? That should have been a priority, but, again, Phil was hands off. So, why were you letting Double Fine just make weird experimentation? Like, I get the idea from an awards and artistic thing, but let's be honest, most people don't care about those. People watch the Game Awards for the reveals. They don't really watch them for the awards. They all kind of know the awards are kind of bullshit. So they just watch for, like, the reveals. Okay? So caring about awards doesn't mean anything. Make good games that people want to play. That's all it boils down to. So Asha's kind of correcting that, and in that correction, it feels like an overcorrection. It feels like it's going too far, but really she isn't. And she's doing other things that should have happened ages ago. She is stepping in and basically telling Bethesda, like, no, we are not taking this long anymore. She's bringing in Obsidian and saying, no, you know what, we'll let you tinker with Avowed 2 on the back end, as long as it doesn't cost us much, but you're shifting gears. You're doing a new Fallout. These are things that should have happened 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Like, this is stuff that should have happened a while ago. And my timeline may be a little fuzzy there because I don't remember exactly when the Bethesda sale closed. But I want to say, it was a little, right around 5, maybe 6 years ago. Because I want to say it was pre-pandemic. But my timeline is a bit fuzzy there. But either way, as soon as Microsoft had control over Bethesda, the first thing they should have done is say, look, we need a team working on a new Fallout. We need to be really getting ready to ramp up Elder Scrolls. But they never did. Why they didn't pull in Obsidian and just force it. So what Asha's doing, her strategy is sound. We have these major IP, and we need to get on firm footing. So we need to crank out this top IP. And I think that's going to do well. I mean, she's throwing out things like Quake. A new Quake game would be wonderful. Would be awesome. I would love for a new Quake game. Hey, can we get Quake 4 onto the console Game Pass? Like, I can play it on my PC. It's not on console Game Pass for whatever reason. I don't know, because it was one of the Xbox 360 launch titles, so I don't know why we don't have Quake 4 on there, but whatever. But yeah, new Quake. They're talking about refocusing around Doom after Doom the Dark Ages, kind of flopped. Kind of probably back to basics. Yeah, great. Do these things. You could probably, look at how successful Bolt Gun's been. you could probably make some coin off of having a small team put together a classic style Doom with an expansion and what you can do with pixel art nowadays. You could probably do some cool stuff with something like that, like an old school style Doom done in that art style. I think you could probably do some good stuff with that on a minimal budget. So, I think that this refocusing around their top tier IP is going to be good. But it runs, there's risk with that. Anything is risk and reward in business. They do run the risk of burning people out, especially if you're looking at, 4, 5, 6, Fallout games, boom, 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 boom. You do run the risk of burnout. So I think that this is not a long-term strategy. I think this is initial to get people back onto the platform in a major way, to get excited about the platform, especially as they're getting ready to launch Helix. I think that you will see these studios working new IP again, but I think they have to get basically into a more profitable mode first. They have to right the ship first before they start tinkering with things. Will we see an Avowed 2? It's entirely possible. But you're going to see that new Fallout game first. And once that kind of puts them back onto firmer financial footing, then maybe they'll get the chance to see an Avowed 2. But I think it's going to be a lot different than what we saw with Avowed 1. And I liked Avowed 1. I thought it was pretty fun. There were definitely some things I didn't like, but I think that overall it was a pretty fun game. So, I think that when you get to an Avowed 2, it's going to have some tight controls. It's going to be, the battle system's going to feel good. It's going to be a fun game. But I think it's going to actually be a better game, because I think that, you're going to have somebody who is looking over it and making sure that, the worst impulses aren't indulged. And, I think that's a good thing. I mean, something I've learned over the years of trying to be an independent artist and kind of analyzing kind of where I am today versus where I was and what could have changed my trajectory is I could have been more business-minded. I made edgy, weird cartoons that were highly offensive, and not to say that you can't make offensive art. I love offensive art, but that's going to have a limited audience. And, could I have been, if I toned some things down and had more of a thought of like, well, hey, how are we going to parlay this into something bigger? Something more, commercial that eventually we can really make a living at and not have to go back to day jobs, not have to go back to this and that, and part of that is you have to think about audience. And if you're making something that is niche specifically for a very small audience, well, maybe you get to be one of the lucky few that builds up a big enough audience in that niche to fund you for the rest of your life. But that's small. If you're just constantly making stuff that is off-putting and isn't going to draw people in, well, guess what? You're not going to do well. You're just not. So you have to have in the back of your mind, am I making something that is true to myself as an artist, but is accessible enough that people are going to buy into it, that people are going to eat it up, and that's the thing. I think that, now we have somebody who isn't, kind of looking for a level of niche acceptance with critics or, whatever, and is looking more from like, okay, yeah, maybe, winning awards is nice, but really what we want to do is make stuff that really pleases our customers. You know, we're never going to get the full acceptance of critics or whatever, but you know what? If we're making our customer base really, really happy and they're giving us more money, then we win. And that's, I think, a pretty solid strategy. You know, you do the big tent poles to fund the weird little experimental things down the road. And, that could be good. Now, we still have some question marks here. What's happening with Helix and, the multiple marketplaces, Steam, Good Old Games, Epic Game Store. I feel like that is on shaky ground. I think that could be going away, which is a little sad because, I was looking forward to that, but, I mean, if cutting those out means that Xbox survives, then hey, great. But maybe it is something where we at least get Battle.net on there so you can play World of Warcraft on Helix. I think that would be a good thing. I I think that, because there's still question marks around what Game Pass is going to look like going forward. Does day one on Game Pass kind of fade into the night or become a more limited scope? There's still lots of question marks about, like, why isn't, like, Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3 on there? Or, like, where are all these old Activision games? Some of which are currently, like, they're on the marketplace. They're just not available for sale. Like, why aren't those on Game Pass? So I think that you have, some big questions around Game Pass. Why aren't more of these games on here? Where is that console version of World of Warcraft? I mean, I think that there's definitely some question marks in hardware and Game Pass, that, need to be answered. Will this be successful? Will this save Xbox? Will this make them stronger, put them more competitive? Some of the stuff looks really great on paper, but the proof will be, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. And a lot of it also is, when do these things start dropping? It's nice to say that, oh, we're working on a Fallout 3 and a Fallout New Vegas remake. Okay, but when? 6 months? A year? 2 years? 3 years? 4 years? Because this is the other problem that Phil had, was saying all this great stuff, doing a showcase and showing all of these games, and then nothing comes out for 2-3 years. So there needs to be a little more concrete information to really know whether or not this is going to get off to a good start or not. And then, we'll see where that goes. But, these are just kind of my initial, just kind of thoughts, on this whole thing. Like I said, a lot of it's still very much up in the air. And I hope it's successful. We'll see. But let me know what your thoughts on it are in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next video.